Today I'm going to be sharing my must-have charcoal supplies for realistic charcoal drawings. First, we're going to need the paper. My favorite is the Inktense. This is their pastel paper, and I use the rough side. I really like the gray tone. You can get this in multiple tones. You can cover it completely so you don't see the paper showing through, or I like to let some of that paper color show through. You can get this in blues, creams, oranges, I mean, any color you can imagine, but the gray is my absolute favorite. For the pencils, I can't say these are the absolute best charcoal pencils. They're just convenient to buy, and that's why I've been using them. I love them. These are the Generals. I use the white, I use the regular pencils, and then the peel and sketch, and occasionally this compressed charcoal stick. Now we'll be talking about when I use each of these in the actual project in just a few minutes. Along with the charcoal, I use a blending stump. I usually use a couple of different sizes of those. I'm going to use soft tools for blending larger areas or things that I want really soft. And of course, my Tombow mono eraser for pulling out finer details. A kneaded eraser is also pretty handy. When your artwork is finished, you're going to want to spray it with something. My favorite is the Spectrafix. I find that this is the least likely to darken my bright highlights in my work. So that is my go-to, and I put it in a fine mist sprayer. This is going to prevent me from having heavy water droplets. Now, when you do spray this, don't spray up close like that. Pull it back at a distance. I'm usually, I'd say, a foot to 15 inches away from the artwork before I mist, and it is a fine mist. I can't stress that part enough. Do several light layers, letting it dry completely in between putting an additional layer of that. If it gets too dark, you're gonna have to go back over with some of your white highlights. The last would be a drawing board. Any drawing board works. You don't have to go super fancy on that. And then I use an acid-free black masking tape to tape my work to the board so it's not sliding around as I work. Onto the artwork, I've drawn everything out, and now I'm going to fill in the background. This is going to be one of the only times that I personally use the charcoal the charcoal blocks here, but I can fill in a large area very quickly. Now I'm not having to push very hard on this. I can keep a pretty light hand, and then we will blend this out with a soft tool. You can blend this out with all kinds of different blending cloths. You can blend them with shading stumps, but the soft tool I find gives me the smoothest results, and it fills in a large area pretty quickly. Look how nice and soft that is. Now, I personally don't mind if you can see a bit of the tooth. I like that somewhat sketchy look with charcoal. That's just a personal preference, so I'm going to leave some of that in there. But you can continuously layer as much as you need to get rid of that. Now, one of the great things about charcoal, it is the absolute fastest medium in the world. Let me know if you can think of something faster, because I'm pretty sure this is it. But with this, I get that instant gratification. I had this kitten drawn in a single night. It doesn't take a ton of time, and it's such a good way to practice your values. You're focusing just on your lights and your darks because you don't have colors to worry about. For a lot of artists, when they get started, they're so worried about choosing the perfect right color. And I say this all the time, but color is not the thing that's going to make the difference in your work. It's your values. How light are your lights? How dark are your darks? Are they correct? Are they what they should be? So these are what we're really going to focus on, and that is because this medium is so fast, you can practice many pieces in a very short amount of time. Another great thing is that it blends so smooth, so easily. So in this case, one of the things that I'm working on is creating that more three-dimensional look, but we're only working with these two colors. So I've got to find other ways to create that dimension. One of the ways I'm going to do that is by having the body especially, and then in the neck, they're going to blur out from the face. As we get closer to the viewer, we're going to have more sharp details. But with charcoal, because it blends and smudges so easily, it is really, well, easy. I need a better word there. We're just going to keep repeating easy over and over again. But it is super easy to get things nice and smudged. So you get this very natural feel where the body starts to fade off into the background. Now be careful, don't overblend that. I've seen people do that before where you do a couple of blending strokes and think, wow, it looks awesome when it's blended out. So if 3 or 4 strokes with blending looks good, I bet 100 would look better. No, do not do that. Less is more here, just a little bit of blending. Worst case scenario, if you do overblend, you can go back over it, but why waste the time doing that if we don't need to? Now, really quick before we go further into this, I just want to let you know if you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is too fast, I would love to follow along real time, I have that taken care of for you. If you head over to Patreon for as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my longer tutorials. I have a new one every single week. This one is over there right now. It's a 2-hour-long real-time lesson. And I have 300 available immediately when you sign up. I know you may be thinking, wow, that's really cheap. These must not be very good. No, you're just getting my full access to my full library that I started back in 2015. So we have years and years worth of weekly art lessons available instantly when you sign up. If you want to check out what I have in the Patreon video library, I have a link in the video description. Also, now we have some step-by-step photos for you to download to make it even easier for you to follow along. We just started adding those into the lessons. Back to this kitten. So we're going to focus on the ear. I have a huge tip for you. Don't look at it as an ear. Well, two things really. Don't rush over this. When you were working on animals, it's easy to think it's an ear. It's not that big of a deal. If you rush over it, it's going to pull down your entire piece. It doesn't matter how great the rest of the face looks. You want to make sure that every element of your piece you put just as much of attention into. So in the case of the ear, I spent nearly as long on this one ear as I did the entire face. That's how much work and how much time you want to put into that. The next thing to be aware of is this is just a mess of shapes. They look like abstract shapes. Look at it as abstract shapes as you work. If you have in your head, I'm drawing an ear, it's probably not going to look super realistic. So in this case, I'm looking at the weird abstract shapes. And one of the things that you can do if you have a hard time getting your brain wrapped around that concept, turn your work and your reference photo upside down and just focus on the shape. So it kind of messes with your mind. So you're not seeing it so much as an ear now. You're just looking at that photo and copying what you see. And you have to trust that the reference photo is correct because it doesn't make sense. When you're zoomed in and you're looking at all these little details in the ear, it is the weirdest. It's just weird. There's nothing about that when I was working on it that looked ear-like to me. You just have to look at the weird shapes. And that's something that you're going to be doing in art in general. You want to start teaching your brain to look at the abstract shapes in whatever it is that you're drawing. Don't let your brain take over and think, oh, I know what an ear looks like. I know what an eye looks like. I don't even need that reference photo. We got this. It comes out looking more cartoony. If you're going for something more realistic, we really want to focus on those abstract shapes. Another thing to notice here, look how I worked from what was farthest back in the ear and pulled my way forward. So the skin in the very, very back of the ear. The hair went last. If I start putting the hair in first, I'm having to work around that to get what's behind it. So it's easier if you look at what is farthest back and then work your way forward. When you're painting or drawing fur, make sure you're paying attention to how long each strand of fur is, how thick it is, how it clumps and clusters together. You don't want to just put a bunch of random confetti lines everywhere. It won't look natural. These bits of fur are going to overlap each other a lot. This ear being farther away from the viewer, I am going to not put as much detail as I did the other one. I want this to be blurred out quite a bit more than the ear closest to the viewer. Now notice as I work on this, I've broken it up into little mini chunks. So I worked on the back portion of the body, then the neck, then one ear, then the other ear. Because I've separated this into one area that I work on start to finish, or nearly start to finish, I'll do a few little details later, but mostly start to finish, it makes it so that it's not as overwhelming to work on. If you're trying to do this much detail and you're working all over the place, you're doing the entire head all at once, you tend to lose your place and things start getting rushed. They start getting very messy. So by working on these tiny little areas, one little chunk at a time, it makes it much easier to tackle and really focus on that detail. Now with the eye, I started by shading it in just a medium. I didn't go super dark on that. And a lot of the shading that I do is done with what little charcoal is left on the shading tool. So it's not even like I had to shade it with a pencil and then blend it out. The shading tool themselves, that right there, will be holding some of that charcoal. Or the soft tool, same thing, it'll be holding some of that charcoal and you can use that to draw and shade. So I filled in a medium color and now I can go on top with finer details. I can come back with lights and darks. So I like to start with a sort of mid-range color. I don't want to start with my darkest darks or my lightest lights. By starting with that mid-range, it gives me a great place to start. So now as I come through, I can get highlights, I can get shadows, I can go both directions there. Now, if you want a lot of detail in your work, work larger. That's an easy thing to do with charcoal because it is such a fast medium. You can get big pieces of paper and get a ton of tiny, tiny detail fairly quickly. But the larger you work, the easier it's going to be for you to get in tiny detail. So when you take a photo and you post that online or in your gallery, it looks absolutely amazing. Because whenever you take a large photo with a lot of detail and shrink it down, it looks even better. If you try to do the reverse where you don't have a lot of detail and you blow it up, make it larger, whether it be for prints or just zooming in, it doesn't look that good. So it's better if you've got something that you worked larger and shrunk down for prints, for online, for social media, everything, than to try to do the reverse. Especially if you know you want to make large prints, I would definitely recommend work larger. For me, I don't make prints of my work any larger than what the original was, even though the DSLR is taking a really high resolution photo. When you make that work look larger, even though I've got enough pixels in there, we're all good there, it just doesn't look very good. You lose so much detail in that because the detail wasn't there in the artwork itself. So work as large as whatever you're going to want to display that work as, especially if you're making prints that you want to be very large. But either way, even if you're not making prints, when you work big and get tons of tiny detail in there, it looks so good. Much easier to get that little detail the bigger you work. Now here we've really got to watch the detailing in the fur. Again, watch the reference photo. Which direction does that fur move in? There's this myth that to be a good artist, you work from memory, you work from your mind. That's not a thing. That's not a real thing. The only way that works is if you've drawn that specific subject multiple times. I'm talking 50 times. I've drawn a flamingo. I can get away with not needing a great reference photo, but I'm still going to use a reference photo. All of your best artists that work in realism, they're all using reference photos. This idea that to be good, you don't look at anything, it's a very kind of childish view of art. That's just not how it works. Get yourself a decent reference photo, and as you work, look at the direction that the fur is moving in, how it constantly shifts. I don't care how many cats I've drawn, I'm not going to remember where that fur moves and which direction it's going and how it twists and turns, how it clumps together. Get yourself a decent reference photo. That's going to make your work look so much better than trying to go from memory. Our memories are not as good as we like to pretend they are. Now, as you're working, it's a good idea to be spraying that Spectrafix I showed you at the beginning of the video. This is going to help the charcoal to adhere to the paper longer. Now, don't think that means it's completely sealed and it will never smudge again. It absolutely will, no matter what kind of spray you put over this, it will smudge. The goal of putting a spray on it is to keep that charcoal from falling off the paper over the years. It will minimize the smudging to an extent, but the main thing is we're going to frame this behind glass, even when you put the spray on it. And when over the years, you'll notice little bits of the charcoal. There's a fine dust that will be on the mat. The charcoal just starts to fall off. By putting a Spectrafix spray type thing or any other fixative, that's going to minimize the fall off over the years. And again, it's behind glass. It's not that it's going to get smudged in that case, but this will keep the charcoal on the paper more for long term. So I do recommend spray it as you work. Don't just wait till the end. Partway through, put a layer on it and you can work right over it. But this is going to help that charcoal to stick to the paper even better. Now, if you spray it and your work you go too heavy, you'll lose some of your whites. It will get darker. Now, the Spectrafix I do find to not darken the whites as much as a lot of the other sprays. But if you go too heavy on that, it might still darken it a little bit. So in that case, just take your white pencil and go over those areas as needed. But I find that the color shift with Spectrafix is minimal, if at all. As long as you don't spray too dark. If you go too heavy, it doesn't matter what you use. It's going to darken everything. But if you do a lot of light layers, then it shouldn't shift much at all. Some artists don't like to spray anything because of that. And while I can certainly understand why you wouldn't want to, I have seen over the years, if you talk to a framer, they'll show you too, where they've reframed something, or they'll tell you, I should say, where pastels and charcoal, that will start to just dust off the work. It's minor. It's not the end of the world. It's not super noticeable in the art. We're not talking about huge chunks missing, but it's always a good idea to protect your art as much as you possibly can. Some more bits of fur in here, and notice that I'm going back and forth. So I'll do the light bits of fur, and then I'll go back through and pull some dark areas in between. So it's not just my darkest dark, my lightest light. I've got multiple various values in there, ranging from as light as I can get it all the way down to as dark as I can. Last, we put on the whiskers. Don't get antsy on that and try to put the whiskers in early. Yes, it makes a huge difference in the work, but if you put the whiskers in too early, you're trying to draw around them as you blend everything else in, and it makes your life a lot harder. So whiskers pretty much always go last, no matter what medium you're working in. Some final details there. And there is our finished kitten. Again, if you want to draw this with me in real time, head over to Patreon. The link is in the video description, along with a link for all of the supplies that I used here. Hey, if you're not already following me over on MeWe, you're missing out on all of my critters. If you want to keep up to date with photos and see all of the photos of the red-eyed tree frogs, my dart frogs, all of our shoulder chickens, my greyhounds, all of that you can find on MeWe. Oh, and the reef tank. Can't forget about the reef tank and all those critters that you can find at MeWe. It's a social media platform that is like Facebook, but without ads. They're actually big on your privacy, and there's no algorithms. So if you're following someone, you actually get to see everything they post, not what people paid advertisements for on Facebook. So it's a pretty cool platform. Think of Facebook back when it first started, when we all actually liked it. It's more like that, but again, with privacy that never existed on Facebook. We've also got a very large art group over there, very active. You can post your work, ask for other artists for advice. Everything is linked in the video description if you do want to join there. It's free and fun. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, YouTube may or may not notify you when new content goes up. So also click on the bell notification to find out when I've got new videos go live. I've got new content every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.